People of Reddit who have found a corpse, how did you find it? How did it get there? And what's the aftermath of you finding it? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Going to school one morning, 6th grade, noticed my neighbor's car was backed up to his window, still running. Then noticed the hose pipe running from the exhaust right into his bedroom window. Opened the door to a house filled with exhaust and confirmed he was still in there. Then went back home and woke my parents to call 911. Didn't have to worry about going to school that day. Rest in peace, Danny Rubio. Found one while jogging around the lake or reservoir thing in my childhood neighborhood. Someone else had found it a few minutes before and was calling it in. That really aren't joking when they say runners are usually the ones to find dead bodies. That was a hobby I decided not to continue. We didn't find it, but showed up on scene before the cops. My SO and I were walking our dogs on a trail along a river we live about 30 seconds from. Close by, we heard a dog barking like crazy, someone yelling, and in the distance, sirens approaching. As we turned a corner that opened up to a calm eddy in the river people tend to swim in, we saw an unconscious man fully clothed and soaking wet, pull up on the riverbank with his shoes still in the water. The very stressed dog was standing by him. A man was kneeling over him, and a woman was running towards us to meet the police cruiser that had screamed into the parking lot behind us. We had 2 dogs and a baby stroller with us, so we weren't going to be much help. We stood aside while the police rushed to the riverbank and turned back the way we came. I hoped so badly that they were able to revive him, but read a few hours later, a 19-year-old man had drowned attempting to save his dog who had been pulled into rough water. A word of advice for those with dogs: your dog is a much better swimmer than you. The dog was able to swim to shore while his owner was sucked into the undertow to be pulled out 300 meters downriver. During the 2003 New York blackout, I was at my grandfather's place in Queens. It was nighttime, and we decided to go out to check out the city with no lights on. Once in a lifetime opportunity, right? I was there. So we barely made it to the end of our block, where there were 2 ambulances and 5 cop cars blocking the street. On the sidewalk, we saw the dead body of a man face down in a pool of blood. His back was all bloody, like if he had been stabbed multiple times. We just went back to the apartment and gave up on sightseeing. Just shortly after I graduated high school, my best friend, she was a year younger than me, was really depressed and having trouble concentrating during her graduating year. She was texting me earlier that day and she was in a weirdly good mood. That freaked me out. I asked her if she was all right and said she was fine. Later that night, around 11 p.m., she sent me a text saying she loved me, and I immediately got into my car, drove to her parents' house, and banged on the door until her mom got up. I told her that we needed to go to my friend's room. She had locked her door and barricaded herself in. When we got into her room, we found her in the closet. She had hung herself. Her stepdad and I cut her down while her mom called the police. I went with her in the ambulance. Her mom drove behind in her car while they were trying to resuscitate her. She passed in the ambulance on the way to the hospital. Not sure if this is what you're looking for here, but I was taking care of a patient on hospice care, end-stage COPD. His daughter stayed at his bedside at all times. It was about 9 at night, and she told me she was going to leave for about 20 minutes to go home, get a shower and change, and that she would be back. Call if anything happens. I walked in to check on her dad about 10 minutes later, and he had passed. It was on me to call the daughter, and I could tell as soon as she answered the phone that she knew what it was about. That was the first and also my toughest. I got her dad all cleaned up and looking peaceful, gave her a big hug when she got back and shared her tears. I will never forget it. It was moving, life-changing, and profound, and, interestingly enough, an overall very positive experience. Thanks, OP, for the trip down memory lane. It has been a long time since I thought about that. I didn't discover a dead body, technically. I did have a patient of mine pull out a handgun and commit suicide while in the middle of our session. We were in the middle of his session, he was talking and made no indication he was suicidal at all. In fact, he hid it very well because he hadn't made any indication of being suicidal the entire time I'd been seeing him. He was just talking away, and without any indication, pulled a handgun out, placed it to his head, and pulled the trigger. It happened so quickly, there was no way for me to react or try to stop him. I just picked up a phone and called emergency services. They showed up and called it. I was interviewed. They went over everything and eventually ruled it a suicide, and that was it. His mother kept calling me for about 2 to 3 months before her husband made her stop. She was just an emotional wreck. I explained what happened and that sometimes things like this happen. I was sorry for her loss, but there was nothing I could do for her. I was at my friend's house playing basketball on their driveway. It was a normal summer day, nothing out of the ordinary. When we were playing, we heard one gunshot alongside a loud scream. Then like 10 seconds later, we hear a second gunshot. Note, the gunshots came from behind his house. After about 2 minutes had passed, we decided to be stupid and to look over the fence to see what was the commotion. We see 2 dead bodies, one next to another. A tall male was shot in the chest with a shotgun, and the other corpse was next to his. The other corpse, we assume it was a woman because of the body shape. 3/4 of her head was blown off. We assume it was suicide. The blood was all over the walls and the window. We were horrified by what we saw. It looked like something straight out of Saw. Not me, but my little brother found one when we were helping our neighbor find her dog. The body was that of a 12-year-old boy, just older than me and my brother at the time, and it was in a storm drain under a new section of the neighborhood. It turned out that some new neighbor who moved in soon after his divorce killed his child and hid it, expecting the creek to wash it away. However, the construction backed up the creek. I consider myself lucky for not being on that side of the neighborhood and never having seen the body. Apparently, it was the thing of nightmares. Found a dead body in one of our deer blinds one year, the last year for that matter, after she had crawled up in there for sun protection. The only thing she had was an empty gallon of water. Tons of game wardens, sheriffs, and police showed up, way more than you would think is necessary, but I'm sure it was to ensure nothing nefarious had happened. It took several hours and quite a bit of muddling around waiting for all of the law to figure things out before everything was settled. They said that she was an immigrant, not a drug smuggler, which we had also seen many of, and that she had died of heat exhaustion or dehydration. She got in the deer blind to try and get shelter from the sun, but it was too hot and she didn't have enough water. Sad story. I came home from work one night to find my dad's body. He'd suffered some type of medical problem, probably a stroke or heart attack. We never had an autopsy done, and was laying on the family room floor with his eyes and mouth open. He was already cold, but I screamed for my mom to call 911 and did CPR anyway. When EMS arrived, they pronounced him dead and called the mortuary. I didn't really find a body, but it turns out we were only a few feet away from one. My dad and I were on a walk down a typically nice city sidewalk that bordered a Cherry Creek in Denver, a fairly populated place. We ended up walking through a section that went under a road and smelled something absolutely foul wafted through the breeze from the tall weeds or grass that was growing by the creek. I told my dad that was the smell of decay. Even as a naive teenager, I knew that smell. He didn't believe me, stating that it was just the smell of someone who had used the creek as a bathroom, admittedly a common occurrence in that area. I thought he was crazy because it absolutely unmistakable to me. I had the inkling that we should have stopped and called the non-emergency line for the police, but he talked me into thinking it was nothing and we moved on. 2 days later, they found the body of a 20-something-year-old guy. It had been ditched in the exact spot after he was murdered. I do occasionally wonder if the investigation would have gone more smoothly if we would have called the police or something before the body decomposed even further than it had when they found it. I was like 18 or 19, driving home from my buddy's house. It was about 2 a.m. and pulled up on what looked like a guy laying in the middle of the road. I stopped, and about that time like 15 police cars and an ambulance pull up. I just sit there wondering if I could go around or something. A fireman came up to my door and said that the guy was dead and it was a murder scene, and I would probably have to find another route home. For some reason, he thought I was someone else. It was a small town, and I looked like the guy he thought I was. So he pulled some strings with the cops and let me go around the body and go home. My mom used to be an apartment manager and found a few dead bodies while on the job, but only one has any attachment to me. She had a habit of checking in on the elderly tenants on a daily basis if they didn't have anyone living with or taking care of them, which was very nice. One lady had just had her husband pass a few weeks prior, and my mom went to check on her weekend off. No one had seen her for the past few days, and my mom got worried. Now, my mom was 9 months pregnant with me and due any minute, but wanted to work until she went into labor, So really any stress or exercise could make her go into labor. Anyways, she gets to the apartment and no one answers, so she gets her key to access the apartment in case the woman had fallen or something. When she opens the door, she had a full view of the couch where the tenant was resting. She had committed suicide by putting a plastic bag over her head and duct taping it shut around her neck, so she died from asphyxiation. This sent my mom into stress-induced labor, and I was born hours later. Didn't find a corpse per se, but I was wandering around in the dimly lit electronics section of a drugstore and smacked right into a paramedic's gurney with a sheet draped over the body on top. I got the F out of there. This was in a shopping mall with a lot of retirement homes and seniors housing nearby, so sometimes shit happens. I just didn't expect to literally bump into a corpse. Don't know where the F the paramedics had gone or why anyone thought it would be a good idea to leave a body unattended in the middle of a store. It was a cold, foggy Sunday morning as I was alone working or opening up the deli I owned. Went to the back alley behind the store and noticed the two legs sticking out from the car with the two large boots on. I said, "Wake up!" and there was no response. I kicked the bottom of the boot and it felt like I was kicking concrete. That is when I realized what stiff as a board meant, as the guy was dead, called 911 and they picked him up.